I was never a very religious man. Hell, I wasn't even a very good man. Most of my life was lived in direct contrast to almost every tenet of any religion. I sat there listening to the raspy breath escaping my lungs. I was never a religious man, and even now in my final hours I reached out to no God. I said no prayers to fall upon absent ears. All I could think about was my life and the events that put me here. Spring of 1969. I awoke in the morning after a night of terrible sleep and stretched out as far as the space of the small cot would afford to me. I slid myself up and over its edge, slipping my feet into my black combat boots. The chatter of over a dozen other men drowned out any private thoughts I might have had, which was fine because a strange feeling of sadness has overcome me. Popping open a small trunk, I retrieved my uniform and donned it, buttoning the olive green shirt over my white undershirt. As I walked over to the edge of the tent, one of the older men shouted to me, "Dick! Hey, Dick!" I glanced in his direction to see the sergeant in charge of the platoon ever since my first lieutenant bit the dust coming towards me. "Sir?" I said, snapping into an attentive stance. "At ease, boy." I fell to the at ease stance and looked expectantly at him. "Need you out on the horn. Apparently something's happened that requires your attention." I raised an eyebrow, only to be met with a shrug as he turned to go chase down some of my other squad members. I walked to the tent's edge and pulled across the lip to open it and exited into the heavy air thick with moisture. Mornings in Vietnam were always like this, hot and muggy. The intense rain through the night hadn't helped as a blanket of fog had settled upon the ground, almost so thick it felt like you were wading through water. I hurriedly made my way to the radio tower, stomping through the muddy ground along the way. At the top of the tower, I found the radio telephone operator waiting for me with a solemn look on his face. Upon seeing me, he stood and shook my hand. "Son, well, I think I'll just let you have this." He handed me the receiver from the radio, and after fiddling with the console, I could finally hear a voice through the static. "Richard? Richard, can you hear me?" The voice belonged to my mother, a congresswoman for my home state. "Mom?" I said, surprised. "Richard, I'm pulling some strings and bringing you home. It's your father. The grief was so laden in her voice that I didn't even need her to finish the sentence. Honestly, I don't think I needed this call to know. The night prior, I had the strangest dream. It was hard to recall all of it. It had started with me locked inside a dark room. I could see just a slit of light coming from a very far distance away from me, leaking into the room ever so slightly. I could tell the space I was in must have been enormous. In the dream, I could see figures pacing outside of the door. I could hear them arguing and yelling, but I couldn't make out the words they said. It was then that the door swung open to reveal my father, dressed in a lab coat, which to me felt strange because my father had been a stay-at-home father for most of his life, something unheard of in those days, of course, but he was adamant to support the political career of my mother. He strode over to me for what felt like eons. Each step echoed in the space around us, and as he finally arrived, I was looking down at him from dozens of different angles all at once. "I'm sorry. There is nothing I can do. I've tried. I've failed. Please tell him I tried." The dream warped, and I was now looking down at my father in bed, from just one angle this time, and looking far too old and much more frail than he had when I had left. He looked back up at me, and his face contorted into horror. He tried to wriggle around in the bed, but it was like his limbs simply wouldn't function. As he struggled to move, he opened his mouth to speak. No sound escaped them, but from the movement of his lips, I could garner the words, "I'm sorry," again and again. Then I woke up. "Richard, honey, are you there?" The voice of my mother brought me back to the present moment. "Yes." I sat there, numbly. "Listen, you'll be home by the end of the day, okay? We need you home. Sharon is inconsolable, and Michael, well, he's Michael." Sharon, my younger sister by 5 years, was only 18, and she had absolutely been a daddy's girl from the time she could speak, so I can imagine she was devastated. Michael was our younger brother, and he was only 15. I'd been in Vietnam for 4 years at this point, so I missed his becoming a teen era. I'd gotten letters, though, describing how difficult he had become from my mother. Apparently he was a real rebel, having been caught drinking, smoking reefer, and even got himself in some hot water when he had burned down an abandoned factory. All right. I stood up and I could still hear my mother saying something on the radio, but all I could think about was my father, how I wasn't there in his final moments. The worst part of it for me was that I wasn't even drafted. I chose this, stupidly of course. Instead, I should have stayed home. I should have let my parents get me set up with a cushy government job. I hadn't seen him in 4 whole years, and now I never would again. My mother was accurate with the information. It wasn't long after that a helicopter landed to evacuate me to the nearest friendly airport and out of Vietnam altogether. Some 16 hours after waking up, I was home, stolen from the war into the dead of night. Upon landing in Washington, D.C., I was greeted by a driver holding a sign with my name on it. We rode quietly through the night to my family's townhome in the city. If I thought the air in Vietnam was thick, it was nothing compared to the somber stillness that awaited me in the house. Despite it being 1 a.m., I could hear Sharon upstairs crying, layered into the far, loud song Fortunate Son blaring from Michael's room. My mother was sitting on the stairs awaiting my arrival. Her eyes were puffy and red as she strode over to embrace me, and the moment my arms wrapped around her, she began to sob. I held my mother there for some time before I went to comfort Sharon. I noticed Michael's door was plastered with anti-war stickers, peace signs, and other hippie shit. After I got done trying and failing to pacify my sister, I went to his door, which was locked. I sighed and went to my parents' room. I glanced at the ceiling where I had looked down at my father in my dream, expecting nothing, only to be shocked by what looked like someone had taken a torch or a lighter and held it just below that spot, enough to singe the plaster, only in the shape of a ring. I walked over and got onto the bed, reaching out on my tippy toes to brush the circular, ringed spot. Soot or ash came off onto my finger, which I rubbed together and smelled. It didn't smell like soot or ash. It smelled like oranges and pine needles if you burned them together. We buried my father that weekend. The entire time I was back home, Michael wouldn't so much as look at me, let alone speak to me. He was a lot different from when I'd left, gangly and taller, with long hair down past his shoulders. He was sprouting peach fuzz along his lip, and he always wore an olive green jacket with a graphic band t-shirt underneath it, even to the funeral. A few weeks would pass, and eventually my mother began to insist I take that cushy job instead of going back to Vietnam. Ultimately, I decided she was right when she began to plead for Michael's sake. She had me honorably discharged and set me up in a lab in the city, Esoteritronics. It was a leading government-funded research site for electronics, something I had actually shown some promise with as a kid and in the Army. I was constantly fixing up radios and other gear, so it fit me well. I began pretty small there, mainly doing office administration type of work. Over the course of the next few years, however, I went back to college and graduated. This resulted in a bump up the ladder, so to speak, as I was now able to take on more advanced tasks. Winter of 1984. I paced the length of my office, staring at a blackboard across the room. Currently, I was working on coming up with a solution to infant mortality and unpredictability in integrated circuits, a problem that was plaguing chipsets of the time. The chips would pass benchmark tests in the lab, only to fail once released to consumers or placed in lab equipment. Despite this issue, my higher-ups never seemed too worried about it. "Don't worry about it, Richard. I'm sure the answer will come in time. Just keep at it," they would say to me nonchalantly. Not a very expeditious mood for a company whose profit margins were being harmed by these chip failures, I would think to myself. I gave up for the night and decided to leave it for another day. I left the office behind and returned to my home, the same town home where my parents raised my siblings and I. Mom had passed away 4 years back and left it in my name, probably because no one else knew where Sharon was, and Michael was in prison for repeated counts of arson. I pulled my escort into the driveway, where I noticed a light on in one of the upstairs windows. I quickly got out of the car and headed up the steps to the patio. The door was ajar, having been clearly kicked open. I quietly pressed on the door, making sure to tiptoe as slowly as I could to avoid making any noise. Glancing to the side table, I equipped myself with a hefty silver candlestick, carefully placing the candle onto the table. As I crept along the hall, I began up the stairs, and in my moment of nervousness, I forgot all about the loose step a few steps up. Upon pressing my full weight down on the floorboard, it let out a loud groan. I froze, looking up past the banister towards the light coming down the hall. Nothing, no sound. As I continued to make my way up the stairs, a familiar scent assaulted me, causing me to freeze again. Citrus and pine needles? Like they had been burned together. I had to press on, trying to find the source of intrusion into my home. Once I approached the top of the stairs, the smell was stronger, much stronger. Rounding the banister at the top, I finally saw the light's origin was from Sharon's old room. The door was cracked, and light smoke was coming from the room. I dropped the candlestick holder, which clattered on the ground with a thud, and ran to the door, swinging it open. Sharon laid across the bed that once belonged to her, in her room, which was completely unchanged from the day she left. To her side, her outstretched arm had a rubber hose ripped from somewhere in the house, tied around it at her bicep. A needle hung from the vein at her inner elbow, and to her side was a small plastic baggie of a yellow powder accompanied by a spoon and lighter. Heroin. I looked on in horror at my baby sister, who had come home to what? To die? I ran over to her and pressed my finger at her neck upon seeing her eyes roll back in her head. No pulse. She was dead. I sank to my knees and began to sob, holding her head against my chest. It was quite some time before I found the strength to move, and when I did finally come back to my senses, the room around me was almost as nightmarish as her body. Holes had been punched in the walls, and it seemed Sharon had taken red lipstick and written all over them. I scanned some of the writings. Dreams and eyes, father's lies, ring so round and round and round. Can you smell the oranges too? Take me to the forest. I can't save you. I'm sorry for what he did. I'm sorry. Sorry. I couldn't make sense of the insane scribblings and scrawlings she had left on the walls, but the smell of oranges was all too familiar. When it hit me like a truck, sinking into my gut. Hesitantly, as if my body refused to obey, my eyes dragged to the ceiling above Sharon's lifeless corpse. No, it can't, but it was. A small ring of soot and ash was imprinted onto the ceiling. I stood now, my legs shaking, and climbed onto the bed beside Sharon. My hand extended towards the spot, only this time it was hot, hotter than a stove eye. I could barely get close enough without it feeling as though it was going to burn me. What was this? What is this stuff? Was it something from heating the heroin? Was this how my father had died? Was he secretly an addict? I got back off the bed and removed the needle from Sharon's now cold arm. I took the heroin and flushed it down the toilet before calling 911. They came fairly fast to remove her body and didn't ask about the writing on the walls or obvious lack of drugs. The police came and asked me questions. I answered honestly and told them what I had done with the heroin. They offered condolences, then left. The house that had already felt empty now felt like a pit of endless darkness and despair. This place had claimed two of the people I had loved. I decided it wouldn't claim me too. Within a few months, I'd listed the house for sale, and within a few more, it had sold. With it came a change for my life, because in the spring of 1985, I both met my wife, who lived within the same complex I had just moved into, and got a huge promotion at work for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Spring of 1986. My life was slowly coming together now, it felt like. Better late than never at all, I suppose. I was now married with my beautiful wife, Elaine Cook. She quickly became my whole world. She inspired me to do better, to be better. Despite having been abandoned as a child, orphaned at the age of 2, she was incredibly strong-willed and persistent. She had worked herself to the bone, getting ahead of life, making sure her past never defined her. Things at work had taken a turn in March of '85, when I was both taken off the infancy mortality project and assigned to finding a way to deal with high-temperature diffusion in chipsets. This promotion came with a higher clearance than before, and I gained access to portions of the building I didn't even know existed. Originally, I had worked in the labs found in the second sub-basement, and to my assumption, the last basement. To my surprise, though, when my new clearance came, I was informed I would be in the 11th sub-basement from now on. I remember the conversation pretty vividly. My manager, Timothy Rufus, who was also a high-ranking Army general, had come into my office in the morning. "Still no luck on the infancy mortality, Dick?" "No, unfortunately not," I'd answered defeatedly. "Well, that's all right. Not every problem is going to be solved immediately. That said, we're outsourcing this problem for now." His smile was friendly, but there was a twitch in his brow, and something in his voice like annoyance I hadn't heard before. "Wait, am I being fired?" No. A brilliant mind like yours? No," he chuckled. "No, you're actually being promoted, getting a nice fat bonus to your pay, plus new security clearances." I nodded my head and then asked, "Will I still be in this office and in the same lab?" The general shook his head. "No, son. You'll have a new office and lab, both on sub-basement 11. My eyes grew wide. Sub-11? Wait, there aren't even buttons on that for the elevator. How? When? He put his hand up to stop me. "You'll be using an elevator you didn't know existed before now. You'll need this." He produced a new badge, this time with a magnetic strip running along it. "Follow me." I did as I was told and followed the general out of my office, which was immediately flooded by a few men who proceeded to grab anything that belonged to me and towed it after us. I looked back and began to object when one of them started manhandling sensitive equipment, but the general waved as we continued down the corridor. We rode the elevator back up to the ground floor and passed a few more hallways up to the door I'd seen a few times but never paid a second glance to. It was labeled Supply Closet Omega, which now that I read, it seemed somewhat odd. The general inserted my key card into a slot beside the door, which unlocked with a hiss and swung open. Inside the room was a series of computers with men and women sitting at them, working diligently. Across the room, a set of elevator doors awaited me. "You'll be working alongside these men and women here when it comes to contacting us with project updates. Through the elevator, you'll find access to sublevels 3 through 11. Go ahead and head down to your lab, and you'll be briefed by your colleagues. Your office is just there." And he pointed to another door, which now had my name on it. I walked up to the office door and opened it. The scent of oranges and pine needles wafted out of the office, which seemed old and unused. When I closed the door again, the glass rattled slightly. I could see that the letters used to spell my last name were much older than the letters used to spell my first, and I could also see the outlines of residue in the shapes of letters spelling my father's name underneath it. Flash forward a year, and I was no closer to a solution to this problem than I was the infancy mortality issues. No matter what I tried, what combination of elements we used or methods of cooling, helium still seemed like the best option. I left the office on a cool spring night, the air damp from recent rain, and drove home to my 2-bedroom apartment I shared with Elaine. My wonderful world greeted me as I came into the living room, slipping off my shoes and sinking into the couch. She sat down beside me and curled up to me, stroking my face tenderly as I let out a long sigh and pressed my fingers to my temples. "Rough day?" she asked. I nodded. "Want to tell me about it?" I shrugged. "Not particularly. It's just that we are no damn closer to a solution now than a year ago." She stroked my chest now, almost nervously. "Well, I have some exciting news." I looked up, and she reached behind her, slowly pulling out a pregnancy test. My eyes honed in on the blue shades on the tip. I stammered over my words. Well, wait, are you, I'm gonna be a dad? She nodded her head excitingly, and I wrapped her up into my arms as I jumped off the couch, picking her up and dancing around. We kissed deeply and went into the bedroom to celebrate. That night, for the first time in a year, I dreamed. In the dream, I was floating once again in the black room where only a sliver of light could be seen. This time, there were no figures moving in the light beyond. The light began to fade, and soon I was enveloped in nothing but a pitch-black darkness, as if I shut my eyes tightly. In the void, I could see small dots. No, clusters of dots, with rings rotating around them and each ring containing its own dot. I recognized these as atoms. As the dots floated freely above my head, I counted the electrons. Around me floated atoms of lanthanum, barium, copper, and oxygen. Soon, the metal atoms would dance around me, combining in pairs with the oxygen ones to form powders and solids. Then, fire, blazing hot from underneath, as if a portal to hell had opened up, and I could feel the flames lick me from underneath. It came, and it burned everything around me until all at once it disappeared. What was left was a shiny, black floating disk, lanthanum barium copper oxide, a perfect material for my problems, a superconductor capable of handling the heat of hell. I woke up in a sweat with Elaine beside me and jumped out of bed, which garnered a groggy response from Elle. So excited I didn't even recognize that all too familiar smell in the air. I ran into the living room and dragged out a blackboard where I hastily wrote down the formula to this new inorganic compound. CuBa 0.15 La 1.8504. I sketched out the structure and stepped back to look at my work. Yes, this was it, the solution to my problems. I quickly went over to the phone and began to dial the number to the lab before a clock on the stove caught my eye. It was only 3 a.m. No one was even awake or there right now. I couldn't sleep. When Elaine woke up around 5, she came into the living room where I sat staring at the blackboard the entire time. Richard? I smiled at her. Elaine, this is it, the solution to the heat. I pointed eagerly to the blackboard, which she glanced at and gave me a groggy thumbs up before going back to the bathroom. Another hour passed, and Elaine left to go to the hospital she worked at as a nurse on a base in Maryland. Finally, I was able to get ready and head out myself for the lab. I was so eager to share my discovery that I had to drive back 10 minutes in to get my key card. When I got to the lab, I could hardly contain myself. I entered the supply closet and revealed my findings to my colleagues and the team of workers who relayed the information to the general. It was a few hours later when he would arrive, coming down to the 11th sublevel and into the lab. Richard, good news, I hear. He opened his arms wide and then came in to shake my hand. His grip was tight on my hand. Yes, sir. Very good news. A breakthrough, I said excitedly, clasping the open hand and shaking it. I've discovered the key to our heating problem. It is wonderful, son. Tell me, how did you do it? Well, sir, that's the funniest thing about it. It was a dream, actually. I caught a glance between the general and one of my colleagues, followed by a small nod. Then he turned his gaze back to me. Walk with me, son. I did as I was told and fell in step behind the general. A dream, huh? We approached the elevator. The doors opened, and we stepped inside. As the doors were shut, for the second time during my time here, I saw men entering the lab to take things out. Sir, what do you know about your father, son? I stared at him in a stunned silence before asking quietly, My father? The elevator lurched, and its doors opened. We couldn't have gone further than a floor or two. Yes, son, your father. I understand he was a stay-at-home father for most of your life. What do you know about before your life? I raked my memories for stories about him before me being born, only to be slightly shocked. I knew absolutely nothing. I responded as much, and the general nodded. I suspected they'd keep it quiet. It was their duty, after all. We stepped out into an enormous room with computer towers and monitors active, all of them stationed by men in radiation suits. Two of the men got up and brought us suits of our own. The general indicated for me to suit up, and I did. He looked at one of the men and said, "Make sure all the info from upstairs gets out to IBM. They'll know what to do with it." The man nodded, got on the elevator, and ascended. We strode over to some consoles, which showed on its black screen a dot surrounded by interlocking rings, each ring itself containing multiple dots. "An atom, sir?" I asked. The general chuckled. "Well, kind of, but no." We walked to the door on the far side of the room and entered a hallway which shot out for a few hundred feet before turning sharply to the right. "Your father worked here, and I'm sure you noticed by the door." I remained silent. "In the late 30s, early 40s, he worked on a top-secret project. You know it as the Manhattan Project. Down here, we called it just another part of Project Gabriel, as we will with your superconductors unofficially. Officially, that information is on its way to IBM." I still remained silent until we neared the corner. "But why, sir?" We stopped just before the corner, and the general turned to look at me directly, sizing me up and down. "Son, what you're about to see is highly classified, and with your dream and this new information you brought us, I think it's finally time to let you in on the project." We turned the corner to yet another hallway. This time, a single door lay to the right side of it. All the way at the end, there was no light coming from under it, and a feeling in my stomach like waves against the bow of a ship hit me hard. My legs felt like iron as I dragged them along after the general. The door at the very end of the hall had a keypad on its side, and the general stepped in between me and the pad to enter a code. With a green flash of a light and a very loud thud noise, the door hissed and swung open. Inside lights began to cut on one by one, revealing an even more enormous room than the first. In the middle, when my eyes finally saw it, my jaw fell open, and I sank to the ground. The general stood there, arms crossed. "Son, this is Project Gabriel." In the center of the room, suspended midair by some sort of electromagnetic energy field being propelled by several giant obsidian-colored pillars, was a tarnished set of interlocking rings, upon each of which had dozens of bloodshot eyes. At its center, a ball of hot, energetic plasma was crackling and spitting electricity which would contact the field around it and dissipate. "My God," I said in utter disbelief. What is that thing?" The general put a hand on my shoulder and shook, prompting me to stand up. "According to it, it's the angel Gabriel." I looked on in horror at this tortured thing. What? Why? How? What? The general walked closer to the obelisk on the far right, which had wires coiled around its base leading to a console. The general typed something in and then stood back as the crackling beams of plasma shot from the obelisk and into the center of the angel. It let out the most unearthly wail of agony, a wail that pierced my brain and caused it to rattle in my skull. I grabbed my head and fell once again to the ground. Stop it!" The general came to my side and helped me up to my feet. Sorry, had to be sure. You see, Richard, you are special. Your father was special too. He can understand, communicate with angels. We don't know why only some people can, and why some people seem entirely removed from them. We suspect it has something to do with bloodlines dating back to the very oldest peoples. We know more, only, no matter the pain we inflict on Gabriel, he won't reveal all of his secrets. I swayed on my feet, the pain in my head dying down but remaining present. "But why? Why do this?" The general looked at me with a straight and unfeeling face as he answered. "Because we were losing the war, son. We were losing the war, and Germany was going to bring the Book of Revelations. He told us." He pointed at the angel now. "He came to your father one night and told him of the impending end of the war, and that soon your father would impregnate your mother with the second coming of Christ, who would grow and lead the Christians in a movement called the Rapture, a mass exodus to the last livable place on the planet. There, God would come and give us the tools to start again, to make a heaven on earth." The look on my face was pure incredulity. Despite the evidence, the general continued. "Your father, the diligent soldier he was, came to me and reported what he had been told. We couldn't allow that, so we scored the ancient text, and we found a way to trap Gabriel. Your father called to him, and, as you could see, He came. Glancing back, I could see each bloodshot eye was on me, now, staring as if asking, pleading for help. I looked back at the general. Gabriel here gave us the secrets to cracking the atom open. He gave us the power of God himself. He gave us the language of God. And with that, he walked over to and gently patted the monitor by the obelisk. Microchips, processors, the etching on the boards? Sigils of the heavens, designed to move and control energy, to manipulate God's power. In a flash, I recalled my dream during my time in the war. The dark room, my father's face pleading and apologizing. He tried to stop you, to free Gabriel. The general looked at me with a raised brow. So he did tell you something. I shook my head. I dreamed it, in Vietnam, before my father died. The general nodded now. I see. Yes, your father became quite the altruist at some point and decided what we were doing here was unethical, disturbed. He tried to make a case, saying how we won the war, we diverted the rapture and stopped the end of the world. A fool's thought. How could you know that? Maybe we only delayed it. And even if we did avoid it, there was so much more Gabriel had to tell us. Still has. I puffed out my chest defiantly now. My father's son. No, this has to stop, General. This is wrong. You know it. You know it. Do you know what evil you are bringing down on this world? What if God... The general cut me off. Son, God is dead. Gabriel himself told another dreamer we used to have under our thumb. She was so in tune that she could sit in this very room for hours alone with him and bring back so much information. Only none of it was particularly useful, so we cut her loose. Flashes in my mind of my baby sister, sitting here in the dark with the angel before her. Sharon? The general simply stared back and then said, correct. She threatened to tell on us, so we did what had to be done. Unlike your father, she had no family we could threaten to keep her in line. The rush of heat to my head overwhelmed me, and I rushed the general in anger. I didn't think first, I could only act. He sidestepped, and I rushed past into the field of electromagnetic energy, which reacted violently. Time seemed to slow as the rotating rings beyond me came to a near halt. A booming voice within my head echoed out, "Help me! Help me! Help me! Please!" Suddenly, time returned to me, and I was ejected outwards back onto the floor. The general shook his head. Now, son, please, let's be pragmatic and reasonable, shall we? You do have a family. You wouldn't want anything to happen to your lovely wife and soon-to-be baby now, would you? I froze. How did he know about the baby? Was my house wiretapped? Were they surveilling me? I stood to my feet, shaken to my very core. You sick bastard, leave them alone. Then work with us, son. Work with us. Think of all the discoveries to be made, the advancements for humanity. I rocked back and forth, woozy. I looked again to Gabriel, whose eyes bore sadness and pain I could scarcely imagine. Decades of torture, unnatural capture, decades more to come. No, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't condemn this being to an eternity of torment. I couldn't. I stood tall with a false bravado. Well, I've never been a very religious man. The general smiled warmly, and then I replied, but I won't let you do this. The smile faded, turning into a grimace of annoyance. I made a run for the console this time, aiming to smash it or grab the wiring. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, echoing through the chamber. Warm blood ran down my back and chest. I looked down to see a bullet hole directly through me. I clutched my chest and turned slowly, gurgling and coughing up blood, expecting to see the culprit of my death. The general stood there, arms folded behind his back with a look of disappointment. I swiveled my head around, and there at the door was Elaine, pistol in hand, no tear in her eye. I fell to the floor, no air in my lungs to protest or inquire. I heard the sound of her footsteps as she walked up to the general's side. Too bad he didn't agree, huh, Daddy? The general nodded. Yes, well, we always have a backup, and he placed his hand on her stomach. As I lay there, I listened to the raspy breath escape from my lungs. I was dying, no doubt about it. I really wasn't a very religious man, and I offered no prayer to God in my end. Despite this, as I lay there, life fading away, I could see the bright and warm light at the end of my tunnel of black. And there stood my father, a smile on his face with a hand extended, my mother and sister at his side. Despite never being a religious man, I was going home.